Okay, let's unpack this deep dive. We are looking at the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision on December 10th, 2025. And this was uh, arguably the most complicated, most politically charged policy decision they have faced in years.
It really was. The headline result, a 25 basis point rate cut. So 1/4%.
Right, and that moved the target range for short-term rates to 3.50%, 3.75%.
And if you just look at that number, 25 basis points, it seems so routine. But the sources we have, they show it was anything but.
I mean, Chairman Jerome Powell himself basically said as much. He called it a close call while navigating a very unusual economic environment.
That language right there, close call, that's your first clue.
Yeah.
It immediately tells you the committee was deeply, deeply divided.
Because the Fed is just caught in this painful squeeze, right, between its two primary mandates, price stability and maximum employment. We're seeing data streams that demand action in two completely opposite directions.
Exactly. On one side, you have these mounting signs of labor market weakness that argue for cutting rates aggressively to stimulate hiring.
But
On the other side, inflation is just stubborn. It's refusing to fall back to that 2% target, which argues for holding steady or maybe even tightening.
and that simultaneous threat to both goals, low growth, and high inflation, that's the classic signature.
Of early stagflation, yes.
Yeah.
And our sources show this isn't just a temporary blip.
So what's driving it?
It's being driven by three deep layers of complexity. First, a shocking jobs data conundrum that changes the entire labor narrative. Second, this profound structural inflation from tariffs and technology. And third, an unprecedented level of internal political division at the central bank.
Okay, so let's start right there with the jobs data, the immediate trigger for the cut, because it really changes how we have to view the last, 8 months of economic data?
It absolutely does. We thought the labor market was just sluggish. But Powell's comments suggested the central bank believes the reality is far, far worse.
So what is their private assessment? What's the shocking part?
What's really fascinating here is that the Fed revealed it believes there has been a, quote, systematic overcount in the official payroll numbers.
Wait, a systematic overcount? What does that even mean? This isn't just a minor technical adjustment.
No, not at all. It's basically an acknowledgement that the government's main jobs report has been providing a misleading picture of the economy. It points to some profound data limitations in their models.
So how big of an overcount are we talking about?
The Fed estimates that official figures have overstated actual job growth by approximately 60,000 jobs per month.
60,000.
Per month, since April.
Okay, let me just process that. If the official reports we've all been reading, the headline news, we're averaging just under 40,000 jobs created monthly during that period,
Right.
and the Fed believes that number is inflated by 60,000.
Then the implication is, well, it's staggering.
Yeah.
It means the U.S. economy has actually been shedding roughly 20,000 jobs per month since the spring.
Wow. That is a tectonic shift in the narrative. We've gone from what we thought was sluggish growth to what the Fed internally sees as actual contraction.
It's a completely different economy. And Powell emphasized, they cannot risk pushing down on job creation with our policy in a world of negative job growth. This hidden weakness was the primary reason they felt compelled to cut it all.
They saw the floor falling out of the employment picture.
That's why the cut happened.
Okay.
When policymakers see genuine jobs contraction, they feel this immense historical pressure to ease policy.
Okay, so that fundamentally reshapes the landscape for you, the listener. But here's the question then. If the labor market is actually contracting by 20,000 jobs a month, why didn't the Fed cut more aggressively? Why not 50 basis points? Why only a quarter point?
Because they're pinned. They are pinned by the other mandate. The labor market weakness is one half of the story.
And the other half is inflation.
The other half is sticky structural inflation that prevents them from easing too much. If they slammed on the gas, they risk accelerating prices completely out of control.
So we need to stop thinking about this inflation as just a hangover from, COVID-era stimulus, too much cash chasing too few goods.
Exactly. That's the key insight from the sources. The current inflation is structural. It's stemming from trade policy and technology, not cyclical demand. We need to distinguish between two key sources of this cost pressure.
Let's start with the one explicitly related to government policy, the tariff tax.
Powell was remarkably candid on this. He identified tariffs as the dominant factor causing the inflation overshoot. He made this crucial distinction. Inflation, excluding all tariff-affected goods, remains, in his words, in the low 2% range.
That is a jaw-dropping admission. He's essentially placing the blame for this inflation problem squarely outside the Fed's control and onto trade policy.
He is.
Yeah.
And the sources show the Trump administration's tariffs are estimated to be the equivalent of an average tax increase of $1,200 per U.S. household in 2025.
$1,200.
And it's projected to rise to $1,400 in 2026. This is because the weighted average tariff rate is now 15.8%. That's the highest level since 1943.
I mean, $1,200, that's a week or two's pay for so many families, just baked into the cost of everything. You immediately see why 68% of people rate the economy as poor.
And that cost is hitting the most essential sectors, creating this persistent cost-push inflation. Look at construction, which, given the housing affordability crisis, is just terrible news.
So give us the specifics. What does the source material say about construction costs?
Okay, so tariffs on steel and aluminum were doubled to a punishing 50% in June 2025.
50%.
50. Expanded to cover $320 billion worth of products. But maybe even more painful for home builders, Canadian softwood lumber now faces a combined tariff burden of 45%.
45% on framing lumber. That's staggering. That cost doesn't just disappear.
No, it gets passed directly to the buyer or the renter, and it cascades into everyday life. Framing lumber accounts for, what, 15 to 20% of new home construction costs?
So every policy decision that raises lumber prices directly worsens the housing crisis?
Right, and monetary policy is utterly impotent against this. The Fed can influence the cost of a mortgage, but it cannot build houses or undo a 45% tariff.
Okay, so that's policy-induced structural inflation. Now let's move to the second structural threat that's equally outside the Fed's control: technology. Specifically, this AI commodity premium.
This is a fundamental divergence that's often missed. While the broad commodity index is up only modestly, maybe 7%, materials critical for the physical infrastructure of AI are just exploding in price.
What's the most dramatic example of this AI premium?
Silver, without a doubt. It shattered the $60 per ounce barrier, reaching over $63 right around the Fed decision.
And that's a gain of over 100% for the year.
Yes, and it's not driven by speculators or jewelry. This
No.
is industrial demand.
So what's driving it?
It's coming from three key areas: solar panels, electric vehicles, and most crucially, AI data center cooling systems and high-performance electronics. AI infrastructure requires massive amounts of specialized silver components.
It's the physical metallic backbone for the digital economy.
Exactly. And look at copper. Data centers, the absolute physical backbone of generative AI, are projected to drive copper demand up sixfold by 2050.
Sixfold.
Which is why Goldman Sachs is forecasting a 6 million ton supply shortfall by 2035.
So if the demand for these materials is skyrocketing and the supply is fixed, at least in the short term, that places a permanent structural floor under inflation.
It does.
Okay.
And these costs are structural because firms investing hundreds of billions into these massive data centers are locking in long-term supply agreements at these elevated prices. You can't just build a new copper mine overnight.
That takes years, decades sometimes.
A 5 to 10 year lead time, easily. So even if the Fed dampens consumer demand by keeping rates high, the massive non-negotiable demand from the AI transition just keeps the structural pressure on.
So the inflation we are fighting isn't a behavioral problem, it's a resource problem.
It is. And it creates a very uncomfortable reality for policymakers. They can't easily break through this structural floor without causing severe economic pain in other sectors.
Which brings us to the next massive contradiction. So we have a weak labor market demanding cuts, but this structural inflation preventing aggressive easing. How can GDP growth possibly accelerate if the labor market is contracting? This is the AI productivity paradox.
Well, the sources reveal a really striking projection. GDP growth is projected to accelerate to 2.3% in 2026.
Accelerate.
Yes, while the labor market is projected to soften significantly, with unemployment hitting 4.5% by the end of 2025.
So growth goes up, employment goes down. That can only mean one thing.
A dramatic, fundamental surge in labor productivity. The AI dividend is finally arriving in the data.
The economy is suddenly learning how to produce a lot more, using a lot fewer workers.
Precisely. And the displacement is already concentrated in white-collar and technology-exposed occupations. Programmers, accountants, analysts. AI is doing more with less.
Which fundamentally alters that old Phillips curve relationship, the idea that low unemployment causes inflation.
It throws it out the window. Here we might see high productivity, low employment, and inflation caused by tariffs and commodities, not by wages.
And this creates a huge risk for the Fed, a risk of a major policy mistake.
A huge one. They risk misinterpreting this structural unemployment workers permanently displaced by AI as cyclical weakness, which is unemployment caused by low demand.
And if they misdiagnose the problem,
They apply the wrong medicine. If they see rising unemployment and cut rates aggressively to try and rehire those workers, they could severely overstimulate the economy.
because the new AI-driven economy is already producing more than enough output on its own,
That's the danger. Cutting rates to fix a structural problem like AI displacement could just reignite broader cyclical inflation, piling it right on top of the already sticky tariff-driven inflation.
okay. So this unusual, contradictory, just messy economic environment, it inevitably led to a huge amount of disagreement inside the central bank itself. Let's look at the vote.
The complexity of the decision resulted in a deeply fractured 9-3 vote, and it featured dissents from opposite directions, a very rare scenario that shows you there's genuine uncertainty. This was not a consensus, it was a compromise.
So on one side, who wanted to ease more aggressively?
That was Governor Stephen Mirren. He advocated for a larger 50 basis point cut. He's firmly in the dovish camp, clearly focused on that contracting labor market data.
He was prioritizing the employment mandate. And on the opposite side, who argued to hold steady?
That was Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee and Kansas City Fed President Jeffrey Schmidt. They argued to hold rates steady, concerned that structural inflation, especially from tariffs, was just too persistent to risk any easing.
They were prioritizing price stability.
Exactly. So the majority cuts, but you have one group saying the cut was far too small and another saying it was completely unwarranted. The committee is paralyzed.
And it runs even deeper than that, right?
Oh, much deeper. We know from the source materials about 6 soft dissents officials whose personal projections for rates in 2026 were different from what they actually voted for.
So they voted with the group but didn't really agree?
Right. And if you look ahead, the projections for next year show profound disagreement. 7 officials project no cuts at all in 2026, while 8 project 2 or more. They are fundamentally divided on the path ahead.
And this internal fracture is happening while the Fed is under this intense external political pressure. Powell's chairmanship ends in May 2026, and President Trump has already vowed to announce a successor early in the new year.
Which creates what observers are calling the shadow chair dynamic. Every move the Fed makes now is viewed through this lens of political alignment. It's a significant test of the Fed's independence.
Which is the bedrock of its credibility.
And that political pressure became very, very public right before the decision.
What happened?
Administration officials, including NEC Director Kevin Hassett, who is widely seen as a potential replacement for Powell, publicly advocated for a 50 basis point cut just hours before the announcement.
Wow. So why does that matter to you, the listener, beyond just the politics of it all?
It matters because if the market, businesses, and consumers feel Fed decisions are driven by politics rather than data, inflation expectations can become fundamentally unanchored.
And if the public starts to believe the Fed won't fight inflation,
They start acting today by demanding higher wages and raising prices, which creates a self-fulfilling inflationary cycle. The central bank's credibility is its primary tool. Without it, they're powerless.
okay, let's pull all of this together. The Fed is dealing with structural inflation, contracting employment, and immense political scrutiny. What was the net result of this tightrope walk?
Well, the cut itself was accompanied by very cautious language. Analysts immediately dubbed it a hawkish cut.
A hawkish cut. I like that. So they cut rates, but sounded tough while doing it.
Pretty much. They inserted new language, stating they would carefully assess any additional easing, positioning themselves to wait. They're trying to soothe the weak labor market without losing the fight against that sticky, tariff-fueled inflation.
So what does this actually mean for the average American household? We know polling shows 68% of people rate the economy as poor or very poor. Why the major disconnect with GDP numbers?
The dissatisfaction comes from a crucial failure to address the core problem, which is the embedded higher price level. As Powell noted, prices are still way elevated compared to pre-pandemic levels.
Right. Even if inflation gets to 2% tomorrow, a gallon of milk is still permanently more expensive than it was in 2019.
And that creates genuine grinding hardship for lower and middle income families. Their purchasing power has been decimated, and a lower inflation rate doesn't fix that.
And the housing crisis is probably the most painful example of monetary policy's limits here.
It is. The Fed can influence mortgage rates, which track the 10-year Treasury yield. It's around 6.19% right now. But it can't solve the housing crisis. That's a supply-side problem. Zoning, labor shortages, and critically, those 45% lumber tariffs. Monetary policy is a blunt instrument.
So looking ahead, the path is just completely ambiguous. The case for patience because of inflation clashes directly with the case for action because of job losses.
And this raises the biggest, most fundamental question for policymakers now. In an era where AI is fundamentally altering productivity, creating growth without jobs, what is the economy's neutral rate, or RISE-STAR?
And for those unfamiliar, RISE-STAR is that unobservable Goldilocks interest rate, the rate that neither stimulates nor restricts the economy.
Exactly. And if the underlying engine of the economy has fundamentally changed because of AI, then that neutral rate must have changed too. But nobody knows what it is.
So if the Fed misjudges it,
The risk of a catastrophic policy error is substantial. If they keep rates too high, they could choke off growth unnecessarily. If they cut them too low, they could unleash a new wave of inflation. The old playbooks may no longer apply.
forcing them to fundamentally rethink what maximum employment and price stability even mean in the age of AI.
That's the challenge. A complex, fascinating dive into the intersection of technology, trade, and traditional finance. We've seen that the current economic challenge is less about cyclical ups and downs and much more about navigating permanent structural transformation.
And all while the central bank's leadership and its independence are under siege.
The real challenge ahead is navigating that deep uncertainty while preserving credibility.
We hope this deep dive gave you a few aha moments and a much clearer picture of the incredibly tight tightrope the Federal Reserve is walking right now. Thank you for joining the deep dive.